Okay, so we're out of practice in recording this podcast, and isn't this out of order? Don't we like say the quippy thing first and then?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
cool.
Okay. Right. It's like a cold open.
So, Sarah.
Yes, Alex.
What do you think you learned from your parents about fighting?
That you can choose between radiating silent contempt for days or changing the locks. What about you?
I guess why radiate silent contempt for days when you could do it for a whole lifetime?
Welcome to season 4 of Mistakes Were Made. We're a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah. I'm a queer, non-monogamous therapist, parent, and writer. And I can't believe this is the top of year 4 of this show.
Wow. Yeah.
I know. It's crazy. And we're so experienced and sophisticated now that actually this is going to be the first and last episode of the season because we spent the whole summer not making any mistakes. And basically, it's pretty safe to predict we never will again.
And I'm her husband, Alex. I don't think any of that applies to me because I made so many mistakes this summer and it almost killed me. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we can make the season a little bit longer than
okay, we'll do
one
it for
episode.
You.
Yeah,
we'll
do it for me.
you.
I have
so
a lot to talk about.
Catch up with my experience and sophistication.
Okay.
And,
yeah, great.
And then we'll close it out.
I'll talk about my mistakes. You can reflect on
your mistakes.
Yeah, from your position of perfect sophistication.
Yeah, so you guessed it, everybody. It's spooky season, by which we mean there's an...
What about me?
What about Jessica?
I'm
That's
Jessica.
what everybody's wondering. What about Jessica?
What about Jessica? And does she ever make mistakes?
No.
Absolutely not. No. I'm here producing resident monogamist perspective. I must have learned from my parents, who both neither made a mistake and would argue about it and never admit that the other person was right. Simmer for days, I think, and then suddenly everything was fine. So that's what I learned. Eek.
Great. This is good stuff.
Yeah.
It really is spooky season.
Yeah. Oh my God. So spooky.
A haunted house, but it's just the way your parents fought.
But yeah, a haunted house all year round.
All year round. Inside your heart.
Yeesh.
Echoing endlessly through all of your relationships.
Well, yeah. Why is it so spooky, Sarah?
Which part?
The season,
Oh, the season.
not just our psyche.
What's wrong with my mind?
Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Yeah, it is the spooky season. And I guess, the election, endless war, ongoing genocide, the rolling disaster that is this country, and then this country at this time, and also pumpkins and costumes.
Pumpkins, spooky.
Pumpkins.
Yeah, this time of year, the veil is thin. Everyone is uneasy. And everyone is extra uneasy right now. So we thought we'd lean in and make you more uncomfortable by talking about fighting.
Yay.
Yeah, fighting. Or,
Just turned off the podcast.
I don't want to avoid that at all.
yeah. No, people like fighting. Conflict.
I'm like,
right?
if basically half of the population is conflict avoidant, like how many of those people decided not to listen to this?
Hopefully they're listening to it because they want to learn how to engage with conflict more productively, because that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and also, like, little carrot, Alex and I are going to take you inside how messy and fucked up our fighting has been. So you will get to judge us and maybe even feel superior to us.
Yeah,
if that helps.
Probably.
So you did make mistakes.
Just don't say anything mean to us or start a conflict, because I will avoid that shit. But yeah, I mean, that's Seattle's whole vibe, right? Is conflict avoidance. And I think I know a lot of people, including myself, who were kind of like raised with that that spirit. But yeah, you're right. So a lot of people are conflict avoidant, and then I guess there are people in New York, we're about to go next week, who are really into conflict.
we're going to get destroyed.
We should have recorded this episode after you get back.
Oh yeah, totally.
We'll have like a before and after.
So why are we thinking about this right now, other than our upcoming trip to the East Coast, where there might be more conflict?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit we were talking about it because we recently had the experience of like a kind of complicated, like polyamorous weekend where we navigated a bunch of sort of sensitive stuff together. And I'm like, yeah, but we'll give people the gossip.
Oh, do it, please.
The two
It
of
was
us.
complicated.
What was so complicated about it?
The two of us went out on a date with someone together. And then the next day we both went on like sort of separate dates with other people. And then we like came back together at a party. And those other partners were there, and you were meeting a newer partner of mine for the first time. So it was like a lot. It was a lot.
Wow.
I was just waiting for Jessica to ask if it was a sex party. I thought that's what was on your on your face over there.
Well,
It was not.
the reason I didn't ask is because when I got to hear this story last night, I kept just going, wait. This was all in one day.
I was like, no, it was 20. It was 48. It was 48 hours.
Yeah.
48 hours?
It was a great 48 hours.
It was a great 48 hours.
I would say.
It really was.
In part because we were just not parenting at all.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and that's the
sorry,
thing.
kids, if you're listening.
If you do
With
have
your
someone
therapist.
take your kids for the weekend, you really got to pack it in, you
Yeah.
know?
And pack it in, we did. Oh boy, cut that out.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it was, yes, but to your point, yeah, it was like there was a lot going on. There was a lot of dynamics with, other partners that were dating separately, interacting, being with those people in front of each other, which I think has been like a source of challenge and conflict before, and like having to kind of like to direct your attention to, each other or to the other partner, and like managing all of that, meeting another partner or meeting a meta for the first time, your partner's other partner for the first time, and then like also just like group dating, sex. That also can be pretty complicated. Like these are things that like are the sources of big conflict, have been for us in the past for sure, and are, I know, for other people too.
Right. And then we like looked at each other on Sunday night and we're like, how you doing? And we're both like, oh my God, so tired. And they're like, anything from the weekend we need to talk about? And then we're like, not really.
Yeah.
Like we didn't have some like feelings that we needed to unpack about it.
We had like a little tussle at some point, but I think it was about like, I don't know. It was like about some small communication thing. Do you remember that? It was like about how we were talking about our other partners
when
or
you were
something.
like, you have to ask me before we start talking about one of your other partners.
Yeah.
That's right. And I was like, well, I did, but after I started talking about them, and then you seemed mad.
Then you were like, is this okay?
And then I was like, this is okay.
I was like, it is, but you should ask me first. And then you're like, we're in a fight.
That's right.
And we haven't spoken since. No. It was like I like to think of that as setting a healthy boundary. So yeah, why do you think this has changed now? I know we promised that we were going to talk about how we fight and how vulnerable we are. And now we're just like, actually, we're perfect. Gotcha.
I mean, I want to lead into talking about why I think this might be with our listeners should know that as recently as 2 years ago, or even a year ago, I think a weekend like that would have absolutely like destroyed my nervous system. I think I would have been having I would have been having more of a bad time than a good time.
Right.
For much of it, because it would have just been so hard for me to navigate, and everything would seem like kind of scary and a little bit threatening, and I wouldn't know how to talk to you about it or when. And it does feel dramatically different now.
Yeah.
And
polyagony. I remember there was that person called it that.
Right. And then, it would feel at times like I was just sort of like dragging myself through experience after experience, thinking like, if I just keep doing this, it'll stop feeling so bad eventually.
Yeah.
Which I guess it has, but there are reasons for that. And I don't think it was necessarily that I was torturing myself.
It also could start again at any moment. So
Yeah, I know.
Better make this episode quick.
exactly.
Well, there's always new things for us to fight about, certainly.
Yeah, that's true.
And hopefully, though, the way we fight when those things inevitably happen is a little bit better than earlier on when things would get pretty gnarly.
I mean, and I just can't imagine thinking about you guys a year ago. You would not have planned this weekend for yourself. Even just like the thought of, I don't know, introducing a new partner to each other or going on a group date. I feel like that's something that you would have like been like, okay, this is going to take like, I don't know, a month of our like mental, emotional space. Do you think that's true?
That does feel true.
Yeah. I think I would have been like, oh, it'll be fine. But that was incorrect.
But you would have been wrong.
Yeah. Yes, I would have been wrong.
So a little bit what has changed.
I'm sorry. I just like the idea of last night we were talking about this and we were like, we used to fight a lot more. And Jessica with a straight face was like, oh, really? Like she doesn't live downstairs from us.
She didn't hear.
Like, no, she's never
Every
heard
fucking
us.
word.
Like, I know what it sounds like when you're downstairs and somebody's upstairs. I'm sure that you've heard things. No, you don't have to answer.
Yeah.
Don't answer that. But yeah. Thank you for your,
But
your
listeners, if you
conversational
ever see her in the
generosity.
wild, buy her a drink and she'll tell you all about it. Yeah, but I was not above like shouting, cussing, storming out, slamming doors,
Yeah.
threatening to
Yeah.
leave, like tons of fucking toxic behavior.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. I've definitely slapped, if not punched walls. Gone into a fetal position, hidden under the covers, just gone to bed.
Yeah.
What else?
Right.
God, lots of other stuff. Just like left,
Yeah.
gone out for a pack of cigarettes, never come back.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So part of that, I wonder, like, how much of that is that change is not creating the circumstances where conflict emerges, and how much of it is dealing with the conflict when it emerges,
When it happens.
and
I
like
think
how you deal with it.
They're definitely in relationship with each other.
Yeah.
Which I think we'll get into. You know, the what has changed, part of it is practice. Like, I think in the beginning with non-monogamy, I was so unfamiliar with the feelings related to it and what would come up. Everything felt threatening. Everything felt scary. Everything felt new. And it was impossible to kind of like discern or scale the fear. It was just like, this is weird and different. I feel bad about it. I'm panicking. And it just like, I had a kind of 0 to 60 switch that just got turned on over and over again. So I do think some of it is you have experiences and go through different iterations of things and you see that it turns out okay. And you start like gathering some information to know the difference between something that is a 60, something that's maybe a 20 or a 10.
We're on a 100 scale.
I guess I was saying it went from 0 to 60.
0 to 60. Oh yeah. Okay. Cool.
MPH. Not
We're talking not degrees here.
Not Celsius. That's hot as fuck for those non-Canadian listeners. So yeah, and I guess I maybe can relate to that around like the more experience you have in a kind of relationship, like in non-monogamy, the more you start to recognize like the patterns that you're in. So I think for me, like definitely every relationship that I have now, I can remember another one that felt like it. There's like more I'm familiar with more of the archetypes, and then like the way that those archetypes also like impact our relationship and how like you kind of receive them. And so it makes, to your point, like every conflict that might come up or every like hard thing, it's not like, it's less novel.
Yeah.
And so you're like, well, I know how to get through this thing where, it's a challenge, whatever the challenge is. Like I'm dating somebody who's like really like emotionally chaotic or something like that. And like, how is that gonna like land for Sarah and how to like communicate that to Sarah, and like you already have those lessons learned, or like I don't know, it's like a random example. I'm not sure.
Now everybody out there who's dated you is like, is he talking about me?
I specifically passed over all of the examples that would sound like people I was dating and
Right.
picked an extremely random one. But
So I think there's that.
I was talking about people you were dating.
I have definitely dated some emotionally chaotic people. Like my type. I also think you and I and Jess, we've been through a really hard couple of years. And, you know, we talked about how this is going to be spooky, but we've experienced some difficult deaths. We lost a really close friend of ours 2 years ago. Your dad died 6 months ago. And also in the past year, I got arrested at a protest for Palestine and ended up like in a really long, protracted court case around that. The world that we're living in also is really fucked up, if people haven't noticed. But I think...
And our cat died too.
And our cat died. The cat died like a month ago. Yeah, that's right. And I think it's not like you and I hadn't gone through hard times together because we definitely have. And like,
God, but not like that.
Not like
level of
that.
Fucking adult ass hard times.
yeah, no, the last 2
Woof.
years have been
Yeah.
a lot. And I think navigating that together has built a lot of trust between us. And the sense that we can stay close to each other even when everything that's happening in our lives is just like maxing out our stress levels.
Yeah. Well, and also that like, God, I think there's more there that like also it makes the stakes feel in like, you know, conflict related to relationships feel a little bit lower because you know it's not life or death. And if you're dealing with life or death stuff all around you, then it's, you know, it feels a little bit more like, oh yeah, this is the place where I'm supposed to be like having fun and, you know, it's supposed to be like generative or regenerative or whatever. And I guess maybe you could feel into that more.
There's also a way that people will reflect back like a little bit of a stretched version of the best of you, and then you want to live up to it. I think in some of those experiences that I just mentioned, some of those hardships, community members like turn to us as people who they could trust as they were, you know, also experiencing that. And it made me want to be emotionally trustworthy. You know, like I think there was like an element of like wanting to be more mature also for my community, because I'm like, oh, people are thinking of me that way. They're thinking of me as someone who can like navigate death and complex relationships and these kinds of challenges. And I want to be that person. I don't know that I have like arrived as that person, but I think like some of the hardship that we went through like made me want to grow up, forced me to grow up. It was kind of a combination of
Or
the
maybe
two.
like see yourself having grown up.
Or
kind
see
of,
myself
too.
having
So
grown
then
up,
you, like,
yeah.
have a higher expectation for yourself that you feel like you can meet because you're like, I did do that. So I can probably also like process these feelings about,
Exactly.
you know,
Yes.
my relationship or whatever.
Yes. So there's that.
Also, we've had more group sex together. So that I think has like taken the charge out of the, like, you know, early on, like the idea of you sleeping with another man, probably like, yeah, it was like more scary because I was less exposed to it.
What about me sleeping with another woman?
Also, same. Never that scary.
God damn it.
It was hot. Sorry.
Yeah. Rude.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just trying to be honest. No, there have been scary things about your relationships with women as well. It's just not like as visceral or whatever. But yeah. And maybe, I mean, there's also just like yeah, like we were talking about, like navigating a relationship with a third person together. It's like, that's hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
It's really hard. And like just having more experience doing that, I think builds a lot of confidence and trust between the two of us. You know, I feel like that's like kind of like doing. I know some people when non-monogamy like start there. I don't know that it ever that it usually works out super well because it is so fucking hard.
To like start out with having relationships together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think once you've done that then like understanding like the dynamics of parallel relationships and like feeling confident in those is like a lot easier. I'm just like managing communication with one person one-on-one is to me so much easier than managing it with two people. Like we're in a three-way.
Yeah, I was just realizing now how that sort of mirrors dynamics that I'll be in with relationship therapy. And I'm like, why do I feel more comfortable navigating communication with three people? Oh, yeah, that's because I am a therapist for couples.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so you think that's not true, that it's easier to manage
I do.
multi-party communication. Yeah.
I do.
Wait, so Sarah, you think it's easier to manage like a 3-person conversation than a 2-person conversation?
Yes.
And Alex, you're
I think a conversation, yes, it's nice to have another person, especially when that other person is Sarah and or Jessica. And I really trust that you're gonna be really like sensitive and good communicators and stuff like that. I think a relationship though, like the communication around a relationship, it's like the thing that we've talked about in the past where like I feel like every person that you have a relationship with, you're like kind of creating this like reality and truth with that person and your like communication and dynamics and trying to do that. And then when, that's not exactly the same reality or truth that you have like with another person that you're in a relationship.
That's why I love there to be more people because I'm like, am I crazy? What's going on? Dude,
Oh,
can somebody
interesting.
like gut check us on this?
But building a truth or reality that 3 people agree on, that then the 2 people
I think that the
us
reason why
two
it's less
agree on, that feels like it's
less stressful
complicated.
to me because you're not going to create a reality or truth that everyone agrees on, and that's kind of understood. And so I'm not trying to.
But then you like have less intimacy if you aren't.
That's why it's less scary.
Because you fear intimacy.
Yes.
Interesting.
That's also why it's way
That was
less.
supposed to be my Sigmund Freud voice. We have discovered something about your psyche. Wow.
That's also why, like,
That's so funny. I'm just like, more intimacy.
and I'm
Give
like,
it to
yes, so much intimacy.
me. Wow. Huh. I feel like people, and if anybody that we've dated together is listening to this, they're like, okay, this tracks.
It does.
One of them
Explaining
wants
a lot.
lots of intimacy, more, and the other
I
one
mean,
wants
I
less.
also think the experience of having like sex with me for the first time or like the first couple of times or like newly in a group situation is very different than one-on-one. Like I am so much more like so much less freaked out with multiple people.
Really?
Yeah, the intensity of like sex with one new person
No, you're
is
right, you're
fucking
right,
insane
you're
to
right.
me. I think
Yeah.
it's crazy. I can't believe that people are just out here doing it.
Gotta
Like,
be like with your when it's like a new person and your spouse, that also must be a thing, right? Do you think if it was 2 brand new people and you, the same thing would apply?
I think it does feel safer if you're there, but I also have had the experience of having sex with multiple people when Alex wasn't there,
Stop bragging.
and it was not as scary.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just less.
I mean, I think it's just like the way I am a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all of this has been to undermine my point that us having more group sex together has made us have less conflict. All right, fair enough. Scratch that one off. If anybody's taking notes, undo.
Yeah, I listed here keys to no conflict:
Yeah.
survive a death together, more group sex.
More group sex.
So I should cross that off.
Sarah's
death.
answer is more group sex means already no conflict.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway,
Is there more for you? Other stuff that you feel like has changed for you that has reduced the like frequency of or intensity of conflict that we've had?
I mean, I definitely think the new relationship that I'm in has contributed to that because I am now
You're finally happy.
finally fully satisfied. Yeah, exactly.
God damn it.
Well, what I was going to say.
I wish you the best.
was going to say is that I haven't dated another man in a long time. And as our listeners know well, I have all kinds of fucking baggage about being intimate with men. And I think initially, I was intimate with a lot of men in the beginning, and I was like, nope, this is hard and activating, and I don't like it, so I'm going to stop. And I already have Alex, and he's the perfect man, so. And there's so many other genders that I also really love and want to have relationships with people of those genders. So I think that initially I imagine that would create less conflict because I would be less activated around some of the scary stuff that comes up for me with men. I think a byproduct of that was somewhat surprising to me is I just took all of my baggage about men and heaped it all on you.
In the past.
Yeah, in the past. And I'm like, well, this is the one man that I have to work this out with. So I'm going to do it. And I mean, a lot of that is what we do on the podcast. A lot of that is like what is fun about our relationship.
I love your baggage.
Thank you. Thank you.
How come
I'm glad
nobody
you
calls
said
it
that,
emotional
because
luggage?
here's more.
Is there a difference between baggage and luggage?
I just have an emotional carry-on.
That's nice. Yeah. Travel light.
Luggage sounds a little more elegant, and
Yeah.
it's like a little more like jet setting.
I'm going to start saying emotional luggage.
I'm going to say emotional cargo.
Yeah. Yeah.
An
There's a
emotional
lot.
shipping
A shipping
container.
container full of
Emotional oversized baggage.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're like an emotional baggage handler. That's like your job. You should be in the union.
Should be in a union. Anyway, I think having another relationship in my life with a man actually does relieve some of that pressure and intensity between the two of us, probably to our benefit.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yes. Enjoy, my friend. Yeah. And do you think that has to do with balance also? Like, is there more balance in... I don't know if there's balance, like more balance in the amount of dating that we're doing. I guess for a fair amount of our marriage being open, the narrative was that like I was dating more than you. And I guess that was like practically true for some of that time.
Yeah.
But then it also feel like it was kind of like spiritually true in some way.
Yes. Yeah, that you were more open and excited about having relationships and kind of like adventuring into them than I was.
Yeah. Now I'm
sure.
like broken.
Oh.
And so now we're the same.
Now we're the same.
Yeah.
Because you've now also had your heart broken.
No, that's true. I'm joking, but also, or like that's a dark way to put it. But I think you're right that there's like a like level of, there was an enthusiasm gap
There was an enthusiasm
on the
gap.
front end.
Yeah.
And I think part of that probably has to do with like our experience, our gender experience, and, maybe not the levels of experience we'd had in the past, but yeah, I think that
Your optimism, my
my
pessimism.
optimism. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
See our metaphors about opening doors earlier, opening the front door.
Yeah. But yeah. And then I think, I got to more recently have been more like, started to understand like, oh, this isn't all upside always.
Right.
And it's not always worth it.
Right.
And I don't always want to be doing more of it. And I can imagine being on the other side of that would be scary and hard.
I think it was scary and hard. I think one of the things that I've been learning about myself more and more, allow me to unpack a piece of my luggage
Yes.
related
You're
to
like,
dating
open up
men.
that luggage.
Here it is. Here's a nice little parcel. Is how jealous I have been of men, but have not really been able to own it in the sense that you can be enthusiastic in a way that I felt like I couldn't because I'm a woman. And that you could be optimistic about relationships and you could be kind of like, just go out there in adventure, and that it didn't feel as available to me. And I think that I had a lot of jealousy around that, and it was easy for me to project it in a weird way on you. Not really take responsibility for that.
I've obviously heard you say this before, but I do think it's like worth like further elaborating on what you're saying, because you're not saying you're jealous of me and other men. You're saying you're jealous of the experience of men.
Of being a man.
Being a man.
Yes.
Yeah, which I
I'm
wonder...
incredibly jealous of the experience of being a man. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't think that's certainly not like a cliche.
It's not?
I don't think of it as being a cliche.
Jessica and I are just looking at each other askance, I would say.
Are you jealous of the experience that I have of going through my whole life not thinking that's a cliche?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just calling it out, because not to say that it's not true, but to say that it's like I just think it's like interesting that would be like a pretty prevalent thing that like people might be like men might be oblivious of, like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
because I think that like the way that like
Right.
feminism is often presented, you know,
I like that. I wish our listeners could have seen the little dance that you did when you said
when I said feminism,
It's very cute.
is that, you know, is like very affirmed and like maybe would make somebody not want to like say publicly or say to like a mixed gender audience, like,
I'm jealous of
I'm
privilege.
jealous of your privilege.
Yeah, I'm so fucking
Yeah.
jealous of your privilege. Oh my God, every day of my life.
And then by extension, like the idea that would like being jealous of how you being jealous of my privilege and like my privileged enthusiasm for non-monogamy would like map to just like the way that our relationships play out, or like your feelings about my relationships play out. Like the obvious thing is like you're jealous of like
The women you're
the
dating.
women I'm dating, but like you're saying you're jealous of the way that I get to date those women
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you're
and how easy it is by comparison, or how
my perception perhaps of that.
yeah, sure, but like yeah, I just think that's like
And
worth
safe.
yeah,
It's safer. Yeah. In a
Right.
lot of ways.
yeah.
Yes. So I
Just unpacking the luggage. I'm just trying to unpack the luggage.
I'm like,
I'm not
where
saying
were we in the script? Anyway,
not saying the
Enough
suitcase is
about me.
empty. I'm just unpacking it.
back to the more comfortable topic of fighting.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're supposed to be talking about things that we fought about more in the past, or like what did our fights used to look like in the past. I feel like we're about to have one, so we could really just replicate
Relive it.
it.
It was all about this. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reason why we're here. I was angry all the time that you were having more fun than me, that you seemed like sort of more liberated than I was, that I felt like I had to hold all of the worry related to non-monogamy, and a lot of the judgment of the world related to it, and it seemed imbalanced, and I was fucking resentful. And so everything that happened activated those feelings.
Right. And then I was like, am I in trouble?
And I was like, yes, motherfucker.
And I was like, oh, I don't want to be in trouble. I feel bad.
Oh.
Don't say aw. Don't say aw.
All the ladies just said, oh.
God. Well, can you think of like the last time or like a really bad time that you had this fight and tell us about it?
Oh God, there's a lot.
I mean, we've had some fights recently that I don't want to make it sound like we haven't.
Well, I think the recent fight that we were talking about related to the sex party is actually an example of how we fought, but kind of productively.
Yeah, so let's talk about the
Did you
fight
just
part.
say sex party?
Finally!
Oh my God.
Somebody went to a sex party, and guess what? It wasn't me.
Oh boy. Yeah. Let's I don't know. Yeah. We're going into this? Well, what level of detail, or light detail?
Well, let's answer Jessica's question as
Okay.
directly as possible. The
When was
first.
the last time? Well, I was thinking about like the age dating fight.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's like
Totally.
a pretty good. I felt like that was kind of a fight. Like maybe we processed it well, but like it's in this exact territory that we're talking about, right?
God,
Like I can't even remember which
yeah.
very extremely young person it was about. No, we were talking about like I was dating somebody or starting to date somebody or considering starting to date somebody who was, you know,
30, I think.
No, you always exaggerate.
22
so
years
much.
old.
Oh my God.
18 and a half.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just have the fight in real time so we can really understand it. Yeah. I checked her learner's permit.
Oh my God.
No, they were 34, 35. But like, yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like the thing about like, you're like exaggerate how young the person is, and then I'm like, no, I'm not that bad. Like that's like microcosmic of the whole fucking thing, right? Like, and like, where is that coming from? Is me not wanting to like sit with the discomfort of like the privilege that I have to do that if I want to, and how like
the implications are so different for you than they are for me.
are different, and like the worst thing about it might be the way that it makes you feel, right? Or like that's like a superficial read. But I'm like, I could do this thing, but I'll be in trouble, you know, or it'll like make my other partner feel bad. And like, obviously that's not what you're asking for in that kind of fight, is to like, you know, you don't want to be like me to feel bad for you or me to like pity you or something like that. You want me to like,
You're like, it is hard to be so old.
Oh, God.
but like not for me because a 35-year-old wants to date me. Yeah, I don't know if this is like helpful or whatever, but
that is like an eternal fight between the two of us, and it has been since we opened up. And I think it's indicative of like the privilege piece and my anger related to that, and how it shows up as resentment and transmutes in weird ways. And like, to get to the way we fought about it, we did have like a pretty shitty fight. I think I'm trying to remember some key details of that shitty fight, but it definitely sent us back to therapy.
yeah,
It sent us back to couples therapy. So
yeah, it did.
had to be a pretty good one. I don't know, Jessica, did you hear it?
What did you hear?
I always just assume that it's the kids, you know, acting up, right?
Yeah, it
it's
was.
the kids screaming.
It
Yeah.
Right?
I scream like a 6-year-old girl, so I can see why you'd be
At
confused.
11:30 p.m. or whatever.
But I think like in that case, I was like activated, angry, and yeah, I think I said like some kind of shitty things that I definitely regretted enough that I wanted us to go back to couples therapy.
Yeah, well, and I think that then you also said it was kind of like you can do whatever you want, but it's going to be hard for me
Yeah, that's right.
thing, which I guess that's like maybe the kind of more mature part of it. I don't know. Is that, you feel like that was the shitty thing that you said?
I mean, I think that was maybe the early stages of learning how to fight a little bit better around stuff that I'm just uncomfortable with. And like that maybe leads us to the sex party. But
All roads lead
all
to the
roads
sex
lead
party.
Lead to the sex party.
partly it was us just navigating like, I am uncomfortable with it. I'm uncomfortable with it for a lot of reasons. I think this is probably a good moment for Jessica to introduce like the different levels of conflict model that we're going to talk about today, because I'm comfortable with it for like metasystemic reasons, for you know intrapersonal reasons.
You're uncomfortable with it.
Yeah,
first,
yeah. And there's not much you can actually do to change that discomfort. And
What about arguing with you? Sorry, I'm just kidding.
yeah, you're not for lack of trying. That's true. What if I talk you out of it?
Well, yes, exactly.
Yeah, what about explaining
about
why your discomfort is not real?
Yes. How about a deft
Invalid.
intellectual argument grounded in specious facts?
You know, but what I was trying to say, maybe in a way that was like not totally emotionally mature, was like, you can do whatever you want. Like, I don't mean that in a threatening way, or I mean that in a like, I believe in your autonomy, and there are things that you're going to do that's going to make me uncomfortable. And like, I would like us to be in some of that discomfort together. You know,
Yes.
I don't want to just
Right.
be like abandoned to it and told like, convince yourself that you're not uncomfortable, or, you know, work through it alone.
Yeah.
I think that was what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, totally. And like share some of the discomfort. And I think the immature reaction on my side is like, no, I don't want to. Absolve me. You know,
Tell me it's all okay.
tell me it's all okay.
Tell me I can do whatever I want, and also it's all okay.
Yeah. And then what I think is interesting, and we've gotten like pretty deep in the specifics of this, but like it is interesting. That then the challenge is like being able to like feel free enough to do the thing that you think that you want to do so that you can do it and find out why you probably didn't want to do it in the first place. Or shouldn't have wanted to do it in the first place.
Interesting.
And you can't, if you deflect all of your like kind of self-control or accountability onto your partner and are just like, Sarah doesn't want me to do this,
So I don't
then you
do it.
never get to experience that thing of like, oh, here's why I didn't want to do it.
Right. Or really
Right.
did. And
Or really
now
did,
I
yeah.
understand that about
Yeah,
myself
I mean,
and more.
in neither of the cases at hand, did it work out that way for me. But yeah, you were right.
So pausing here,
Yeah.
Jessica, what are you noticing? Like, obviously, Alex and I have gotten into like the anatomy of a couple of our fights, which I have no perspective on at this point. So what are you noticing? And will you...
You're like, I just remember blind rage.
Yes, exactly. And will you talk to us a little bit about how different ways we can understand conflict? Because, Jessica was joking about how her parents fought, but it's also worth saying that Jessica is like a second generation conflict resolution professional. So your mom does that for a living. That's also a big part of what you do. Like, give Alex and I a break from rehashing this and talk to us about how what we're saying is meaningful beyond the two of
Absolutely.
us.
Yeah, here we go. We can we can unpack this baggage even more. But it is interesting. I mean, I was kind of joking about my parents. I think the thing I really learned from watching the two of them fight is that both people really do have to engage. And I think that's where that's their kind of deepest struggle, is that my mom was willing to fight about it. And my dad would just like shut down. And then eventually she would just have to give up.
Which is like a pretty common dynamic, right? And a couple
think
would
so.
be like
Yeah.
one person conflict averse, the other person conflict, whatever the other one
Like
is.
ready to go for it. And it's so interesting. She, my mom has taught conflict mediation for my whole life. And she said she discovered about herself. But at first she always thought like, oh, I don't really have conflict in my life. Like, I'm easygoing. I get along with everyone, blah, 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 blah.
The people I'm most terrified of
Yeah.
in this world tell me they're easygoing.
Right.
That's a fucking
And
red
she
flag.
totally like had this realization about herself that like, oh no, there's conflicts all over the place. And my mom does have conflicts all over the
Yeah,
place.
that's what I was
And she
laughing,
will speak up when something is wrong. And that's the thing though, is that she's not afraid to talk about it, express what's going on. She wants to like figure out a resolution, but she's not, but it's there.
Yeah.
She's acknowledging it. But so one of the models that I learned from her, but is, she didn't make it up, comes from research of some kind. But it can be really, really useful in organizations. So we'll kind of talk about it that way, and then maybe we can see if we
Organizations or polycules, perhaps,
perhaps
that are limited liability corporations.
polycules, limited liability corporations, marriages, whatever. Let's see. Societies. So it's called the waterline model, right? And the idea is like above the water, on the surface of the water, you're in a boat, say, and that's like where sort of what you're doing, what your goals are. You're trying to get from here to there in the boat or whatever.
Okay.
Under the water are different layers upon which things are happening. So like just at the shallow part might be like, if we're talking in organizations, your organization, right? The University of Washington, right? And then a little bit deeper is like your team or department, whatever, your work group, people that you work with more directly. And sort of how those roles and responsibilities are structured. And then a little bit deeper is going to be the interpersonal, just like one-to-one interaction. And then even deeper is going to be the intrapersonal stuff that's happening inside yourself, your sense of self, what have you. And when conflicts come up, we tend to go right away to the interpersonal and just be like, this is a problem because Alex is a jerk, right? That is why this is happening. That is why I'm mad.
Great example. The source of most problems.
I don't know. I'm talking about just a hypothetical Alex. I didn't,
I'm singing the whole
first
fucking
name that
ship.
came to mind.
Oh, it wasn't me. Okay, got it. Yeah. Another Alex.
Different Alex. But so it's really, really easy to go there. And then so many times, especially like in work, it's easier, I think, sometimes to address conflicts. But this is where you guys, your expertise comes in to see if we can use this also in like romance or polycules. It's so much easier to like solve problems at the shallower depths of that model. So it's like, oh, well, maybe can we take a step back and look at like how the scheduling is happening or what each person's job is. Is there like a misunderstanding about like what the deadline is? Things like that can really just sort of like take the pain out of conflicts sometimes.
Okay. So it's not just one person being a jerk or having a personality flaw. It's like the circumstance.
Yeah.
So an example in this might be like, we just like didn't start talking about this thing at the right moment. And so there were a bunch of outside stressors. And like if circumstantially we plan to, take a walk a few times a week and talk about our what's going on in our relationships, and we had set time for that, then it might work better. Is that like a good example?
Yeah. Or like I think we've talked about on the podcast before the idea of like guardrails or agreements or containers. Like if you can establish what these boundaries are about a thing, then you can know like it's happening within that safe container rather than like it's sort of a referendum on your relationship or you as a person.
But there's no way to make the patriarchy safe.
Right. Therein lies the problem.
So is that like closer to the...
I mean, yeah, the patriarchy. Surface. It's a great question. To the image, I would add like that, like the patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism is like all of it. It's in the air and it's in the water, right?
Okay.
It's everywhere.
Right.
And so so it's like both outside and inside of every single one of these layers that we can be looking at. So like on the one hand, yeah, we can't blame an individual for the ways that they benefit from those systems, right? And we can't ignore that it's there,
We probably can't find a scheduling solution to it.
Can't.
Okay, I can schedule my way around the patriarchy, I think. But also maybe like I might be a jerk because of the patriarchy. And that's not completely my fault.
I like that that's the conclusion that you came to here. That makes sense.
So maybe the patriarchy is actually like pollution in the air
like
and water?
At the intrapersonal level, maybe if I'm confronting the patriarchy at the interpersonal level, then that will map to the way I confront it allow me to confront it at the interpersonal level, and then higher up on the ship.
That's what I was thinking too. So what is beneficial here is not necessarily that we know how to solve some of these problems, but it's maybe we know how to understand them at these different levels. Yeah. So if you take the example of our last really rough fight about age, I think a couple of years ago, up until relatively recently, I would just be like, this is making me feel bad because you are behaving badly and I don't like it. Right? And I just went directly to interpersonal. And what we're exploring here is that there's like the intrapersonal. There's all of this existed inside of me and did exist inside of me before Alex was dating someone younger than me. And that there are these other systemic levels that it's happening at as well. And that understanding that doesn't solve it necessarily, but I think that it can give us some perspective so that we can stay closer to each other interpersonally as we have that conflict.
Right. Yeah. Because we're both floating in the patriarchy water.
Right. Yeah.
And we know that. Yeah. Well, that's helpful. I didn't even realize that we had a special guest who
Yes.
specializes in conflict and resolution. So what about when it comes to conflict, there's also like, I guess this is on the intrapersonal level, mostly the like kind of classic like fight or flight reaction. Sarah, do you know stuff about that as a therapist? And like, is it like,
Nope.
Is it like,
Never
is it
came
like
up.
is it
came
real? Is it like a love language thing? Am I just like a fight, flight person? Or like how should people understand that? Like in their own reactions to like when conflict arises.
Right. So we're getting into a little bit like, how do you fight? We're understanding like the different levels that a conflict can be happening at. And then we're like, how are we communicating around this conflict and what do we feel as we do? Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn are known as trauma responses. And there are more trauma responses, but
Yeah. Fart as well.
is one of them for some people. Might be at this
People
table.
with IBS.
And there are more, but those are probably like most common in the vernacular. And the idea is that when your nervous system is activated, and you're like in a fear response, like a real like your nervous system thinks there's like a life or death kind of threat. There are these different ways that you might respond, and fight would be a common one for me. That's like the door slamming, the fuck you, I'm leaving you, like that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Like, so when you're a animal, you're like, I'm picturing like an angry raccoon or whatever coming at you like a spider monkey, that kind of thing. But when you're a human being, it's probably not always going to be a physical fight, but
Sometimes, but right. Flight would be to just leave, like to run, essentially, to get yourself out of the situation as fast as you can, whatever that might mean. Freeze is exactly what it sounds like. It's like you just shut down and you're like no longer able to access any kind of ability to communicate or interact with the situation.
The difference between flight and freeze is kind of subtle, right? Like, what is actually the difference between? I mean, is flight like physically leaving the space, and freeze is staying in the space but not engaging?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I'm not really sure. Okay. I think it probably could be a combination.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I've also heard freeze called faint, and it can like literally be like passing out,
right?
Or
Alex, you falling asleep.
Yeah.
I certainly have had that fear response in like
so it's like literal fainting.
And not Sarah.
Yeah, not to drag the two of you, but since the three of us have actually been in some life-threatening situations before when we were international journalists together, it was fucking crazy how the two of you fell asleep and just like left me in my fight response.
Yeah, I mean, I read like really scary like drives, you know, like where we're
to a refugee camp that is under attack, and the two of you are just asleep, and I'm over here like, okay, I'm gonna fight everyone and save all three of our lives.
I actually feel so much better. Like I felt so seen when they added fate or freeze. I was like, oh, that's why I'm not just like a dick.
Just don't care.
Right. Like I
don't you think it's
a big deal? It is so embarrassing.
But no, I think it's in part because you get a lot of adrenaline, and then like eventually that wears off and you crash. This is never depicted in like war movies and shit. Nobody ever just takes a fucking nap, but I bet it's happening all the time. Like,
right. I think for a lot of people, that's where like substance abuse issues come in.
Right.
And if you are having like adrenaline and responses through trauma responses, secondary trauma, a lot of time you take. I mean, that certainly happened to me. That is, you drink a lot or take other kinds of drugs that counteract that feeling.
Right.
So you can come down from it. Okay. And I think that's why when people have PTSD or complex PTSD, that often intersects with substance abuse.
Yeah.
Or some people just fall asleep. So good for you guys.
Okay, cool. No, we're on drugs when we fall asleep. Don't get it twisted. And then fawn. What's up with fawn?
Fawn is where you just want to appease the threat.
Right.
So you just align with or become complicit with whatever the threat is. You know, it's like their point of view, their argument. You're just like, I was totally wrong. You're totally right. I'm so sorry. I'm a piece of shit. Whatever.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Okay. So that's like a framework that, and do we think, to my question before, like, do we think that people do a combination of those things usually, or usually have like a tendency, like, I think I would see myself in the less in the fight and more in the flight or freeze, probably more freeze if there is a difference between the two, because I'm like, if I even leave, then everything will collapse.
Yeah.
But isn't it like situational? I mean, I think about both of you guys in a crisis. I think the fight response is activated, right? Like, like a crisis that is not a fight between two people, but in a,
Right.
like, you got to call 911 type of situation. A lot of people,
That's right.
obviously, you have these same like sort of selection of responses, but I have seen you both.
I just do what Sarah tells me.
That's
What's
it.
that?
So that's a fawn,
Yeah,
and Sarah's still fawn.
I'm like, God, she's so hot. We're navigating this crisis together, and it's amazing.
It is an interesting observation that in emergency situations, which the three of us have been in together a lot, all of us have a lot of clarity, use good judgment, engage like with and problem solve the crisis. Like, I don't actually have any of those responses in an actual physical emergency.
Right.
Right, because
I am like my best fucking self.
all of these
Yeah.
responses are actually counter to like
Interesting.
staying present. It's not like we want to pick the right one of these three
No,
or four
no.
options. We want to actually stay present
right.
with the
To what is
conflict
happening.
and to what is
Right.
happening.
Yes,
Got
exactly.
it. And like recognize the tendencies that we might have to do
Yeah.
one or the other of them, or to recognize our partner doing one or the other of them. But the goal is not
But it is interesting
match
that
them up.
interpersonal conflict with people who I am like have attached relationships with, I will have trauma responses to anything that I perceive as a threat there, but I don't
Right.
to physical threats in the world.
That is really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess I hadn't
it
really
is.
thought about that before either.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to go back to the animal thing, just the idea of like our instincts, our like animal instincts that where you're going to get fucking eaten or something, is, that carries over to like in our modern life as humans to relationships, because
Yeah.
they're so fucking crucial to like
Yeah. Our
our
survival.
sense of survival and safety, that we would be like,
Yeah.
oh shit, I'm a angry raccoon because I have to
Yes.
defeat my
Well, and for human beings, like our survival is absolutely dependent on having attached relationships with multiple people, I would say, and that nothing is a greater threat to us than to be shunned or abandoned or cast out from those relationships.
Yeah. Okay. Can we take a break?
Yep.
I feel like I'm having a fight or flight.
I told you it would be spooky.
So yeah, Sarah, you were talking about during the break, like how to know what to do with all this information. Like we're all gonna be fighting, and I guess as I said up top, we're not like trying to avoid that. The solution is not fighting less. The solution is fighting better,
Yeah, I would agree. And like as a therapist,
more skillfully to dispatch your opponent. No, not better. Better together.
win.
Even. Yeah.
I think it is important to normalize fighting in relationships, conflict in relationships. And I also, as someone who sort of specializes in working with people who are moving from monogamy to non-monogamy, to normalize that there might be periods of really, really hard fighting early on in becoming non-monogamous, as you're getting activated a lot, and learning about the things that activate you. And I'm always on the fence about this. Like, I don't want to normalize like toxic, abusive fights. And I also always want couples to know, and people in relationships to know, that everybody fights and everybody has fought or sometimes fights in ways that feel scary, or that they're embarrassed by, or that they don't know what to do with, or that they don't understand. And that's really normal, and you're not the only person who feels that way, or you're not the only couple who feels that way. And there are just ways to understand the fighting and how you do it so that you can learn from it and ultimately maybe even feel closer to the people in your life as a result. And so you can avoid being your parents.
Right. And in that, there's like, we're talking about like the instinct to sort of try to suppress conflict
yeah.
and like build like a lot of like shame around the idea that you would be in conflict and like present I feel like this is like tied into a bunch of like white supremacy and like nuclear family stuff, and we're just like all trying to act like our family is great and our relationship is great and we don't have any conflict, so let's not talk about any conflict that we do have externally to other people,
Right.
and
Keep up appearances.
and maybe feel like a great deal of shame about the conflict that we have internally as well, and not talk about it unless we're hot in the middle of it.
Well, and since you brought up white supremacy, and we'd already brought up patriarchy, and let's also bring up capitalism, because I think that all of these narratives that discourage us from actually understanding conflict and our responses to it, moving through it together in relationships and in community, keep us isolated and ashamed.
Right.
And being isolated and ashamed makes us vulnerable to exploitation. And all of those systems exploit us.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and so I think it's no accident that we aren't taught about how conflict can be managed, what we can understand about ourselves through it, why it happens, the different levels that it happens at, why it's such a fucking black box to us, and why we're just like, well, I don't know, if you're in a good relationship, you don't have it.
Right. Or like, God, I just can't stop thinking about the cliche of like, never go to bed angry. And so also, if you ever do that, then you fucked everything up. You know, you're hopeless. Right.
Never go to bed angry is like a piece of advice that would just encourage you to suppress your feelings.
Right. Right. Because you can't, you know, or to never sleep, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, or
I mean,
it also kind of just assumes that every conflict is existentially threatening and you have to resolve it. Otherwise, you know, you could be over.
Right.
Yeah. I think what they're trying to say with that is like, don't let, I think it's like actually affirming what we're saying here. They're like saying, don't let like resentment fester.
Yes. True.
Which is different than saying like, no, when you're fucking tired and you need to take a break from, or walk away from the thing, or have a pause from the thing, right?
Yeah, but
so it's just not a good metaphor, or like
it's so sort of it doesn't come along with any of the tools that you need.
It's like, don't go to bed angry on the second or third night. You know?
But you know what they should say is, don't let resentment fester. But if you're still mad when you go to sleep, that's not going to ruin everything forever. Okay, don't worry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, guys.
And do go to bed angry about the patriarchy every night.
Every night.
Yeah.
So normalizing fighting, talking about like you can go through difficult patches of fighting, especially around non-monogamy, and that is also normal. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you're having fights that you feel ashamed of. I have had many fights that I struggle with shame around.
Do you, when you say fights that you feel ashamed of, like, do you think that you feel ashamed of all fights, or are there specific kinds? Or you're just talking about your own behavior in a conflict?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think this has like been a bit of a revelation for me recently, is just like how like kind of like productive or generative conflict in a relationship can be. And like you and I have like, you know, kind of years of experience with that we've been talking about. And like, I don't know that I necessarily like got that, like the good sides of it. I think for a long time, I was just kind of like, oh, we have a conflict and then we somehow resolve it, or it goes away and then everything is okay. And then there's another one, and like, I wish it was just okay again. And then there's, you know, I think, and that was kind of like my family of origin, I think, experience
Right, a very
too.
low tolerance for any kind of emotional interpersonal discomfort.
Yeah. But I recently had the experience of like with a partner of mine, where they had like we were supposed to go out, and kind of at the last minute they contacted me, and like one of their partners had an STI scare, and it sort of like implicated our date, and we hadn't seen each other in a long time, and it had like a similar thing had kind of happened before. And and like other things were happening for me at the time too. And I felt like it made me like pretty upset. And then I like was just like, I don't want to like sit on this. I just want to like talk to them, and then I talked to them, and I was like, I behaved kind of badly, and like was was like sort of mean about it, and I just had my hard feelings kind of at them in this way that like I think I wouldn't normally do, maybe. And that sucked, but then I got to see like the way that they responded to that, and it was like they like expressed how it wasn't great, and also like were like understanding,
Kind.
and I got to like make this mistake and kind of like show my ass a little bit, and I guess they kind of did too, and the thing that like set off the conflict in the first place for me, although that was more like circumstantial, I think, than their fault necessarily. But then it was like if I had avoided the conflict altogether and just been like, well, I feel bad, but I'm not going to say anything about it, I'm just going to be like, oh, it's fine. Where would I be in that relationship now versus having had the conflict and like allowing it to, voicing my own feelings, allowing it to be resolved, or seeing if it would be resolved and then allowing it to be. And like now I feel so much more secure in that relationship and like good about it than I would if I had just been, suppressing those feelings the whole time.
Yeah. Right. You don't have to do this perfectly. And I think like that is, if there's one takeaway here, it's that everybody has conflict. Fighting is normal. It's actually a way that we communicate and understand each other and learn about ourselves and get our needs met, right? And there's a way to do it where we are actually like growing and growing closer to each other.
Yeah.
As a result. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right?
Yeah.
Or that there's like a formula for it. But I think one of the first things is understanding your family of origin patterns. That's why we talked about what our families taught us about fighting. Whatever you saw as a kid, you will replicate until you examine it and try and build something else. Like that's just true.
Right.
So the fighting that you saw when you were a kid, I saw the husband shut down, not communicate his feelings. I saw the wife get really dysregulated and angry and lash out and then feel ashamed. So that's what I did.
Yeah, or if you never saw a conflict get resolved,
Right.
like a conflict come up and then get resolved, then it's easy to believe that they never do get resolved.
Right.
And they either just fester or the relationship will crumble if you have any, and that will make you just be like, oh shit, conflict, avoid it at all costs. Right.
And a lot of us, our parents would hide their conflict from us, but they never actually successfully did. Somehow they failed to successfully hide their conflict, but however they resolved the conflict was hidden.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like my parents would often fight after I went to bed, and of course I heard all of it, right? But then I was never privy to how they made up.
Yeah. I never, same. I never heard my parents. Like,
Do you think it has to do with makeup sex?
I mean, as I was saying that, I was like,
The
Right.
pin was dropping for both of you.
That makes sense.
gross.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, you know what? Good for them.
Maybe you
Good
hit
for
it.
them.
Maybe you hit it from yourself.
So I do think understanding your patterns is important in your families. And then understanding that you will get activated. We will not figure out how to not be activated in this life. So just letting you all know right out the gate, we're going to navigate being activated and scared and having some of these like fight or flight responses for as long as we're alive. So knowing a little bit about what your tendencies are there.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
normalizing
I want
that,
to dig
I think,
into
is
that for a
important.
second because like you can talk about getting activated and it's like a word.
Oh, what does it mean?
Well, no, I'm not saying what it means. I'm saying like, what does it like mean? What does it feel like?
Oh, yeah.
Like I could be like, I might get activated, or you could tell me that you're getting activated. That still does not mean I can empathize with the way that you feel when you're activated, like in that moment.
Yes.
Like, I guess I'm just saying like, I know what that feels like, but you don't really know what it feels like unless you're experiencing it.
What does
It's
it feel like for you?
It's just like such an intense feeling of like fear and like physical kind of like distress. Like there's a lot of like,
How do you
know,
feel the physical distress?
physiological things happening. I guess for me, like, I mean, sometimes I'll feel like hot or like sweaty or like, I mean, I'm having a hard time even conjuring it right now in this moment because it is so, it's like just so distant from your actual resting state. And I guess I'm just saying that, or like putting a fine point on that because, why? Because like you can't, because I think you want to be really careful to like care for the version of yourself that's experiencing that.
Yes.
Both in terms of like shame later on, right? You might be like, well, why did I do that? You know, I feel
I'm just like a
ashamed
bad
of how
person
I
and I
just did
can't
that.
control myself.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Or, and also to like prepare, right? Because if you expect yourself, if you have like some kind of perfectionist expectation that like, I will never never get activated, or when I do, I'm still going to act right.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not
Right.
going to prepare you well. You need to be prepared for like, and this I think comes into some of that like pause versus freeze stuff that we were talking about. Like you need to know when I feel this way, I'm not going to, you know, necessarily be the best version of myself. I'm certainly not going to be the best version of myself. So like, do I have like kind of like resources available, like words that I know that I can use? Have I like talked to my partner ahead of time about like the way that I experience these kinds of things? Like, do I know that I need to like go and take a break, and like I have to have like pre-reminded myself that walking out of a situation and taking a break is okay and is not going to be the end of the relationship like you're talking about? Like all of that stuff is like preparation that you don't do if you just are in denial about like ever being in conflict. Or
Yes, and I think the narratives that we have, like sort of white supremacist patriarchal narratives about conflict, is that you're just going to be really good and self-controlled the next time, and then you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up what does it feel like in your body. I think that's a big part of knowing how to move through conflict a little bit better. For me, like it feels like a ignition in my chest often. And I think that's the fight. It's just like, and then I will like fucking take you down. I'm like, I got it all right here.
Shoot
You know,
flames out of your chest.
exactly. And another way that I sometimes feel, which it's maybe like a way that I've changed around this a bit, is I will feel that, and then I feel like it's like a fuzzy wall of like white noise kind of feeling where I'm like, I can't really respond, you know? And I wonder if that's kind of protective. It's like, I now am like, oh, this pilot light in my chest will cause me to lash out in ways that could harm me and people I love.
Yeah.
And so then it's like the fuzz wall comes down and it's like, why don't you take a
It's
second?
a little, damper.
And that is literally like what I've learned about myself recently is like when I have that physical experience, I don't actually understand at that point what is bothering me. And what I try to do is say like, something doesn't feel right. I don't like this. And I don't know why. And I like need a second, or I'm going to try and figure it out, but I really don't fucking know what it is, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it definitely, I mean, thinking about being in that activated state, like I relate to what y'all have described, and like feelings of your heart beating fast and like kind of that adrenaline feeling in your chest, but also like I feel like my mind slows down or just like literally gets smaller. Like there's just fewer things I can think of.
Yeah. Like tunnel vision.
Yeah. Exactly. And definitely like just yelling about how shitty you feel or how mad you are is like feels good in a certain way.
Right.
And then later feels terrible that you can't believe like you're that person who would say such a thing, you know, like what is my point?
Do you have tunnel vision right now?
I had a point. Yeah, it's like I am feeling it too much. My brain slows down. I think that's what it is that I really feel strongly that like reduced mental capacity for like just thinking at all, you know, anything except for that feeling. So being able to train yourself to pause and let yourself come back into your like fuller self.
And remember,
is really
it's good information. That's why I like conflict. And I want people to have conflict. Like if something that your partner has done or someone who's important to you has done something or said something or something has come up between the two of you and you're having a activated trauma response, there's a reason for it. Right? Like that is good information. You deserve that information. You can do good things with that information, you know? So I just always like want to remind people that like, this is a part of who you are too, and what you have to learn about yourself. And we don't have to like judge it. We just have to know that, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is true for other people, but I think for me, that kind of like response always comes with a feeling of shame about it. Or it did for a really long time that like nobody should ever see you sweat. You should never have a hard feeling like that. And if you did, that it was sort of like something you should be ashamed of, which is just like kind of like doubles down on like, you know, not being able to do anything productive with it because you're just like trying to make it go away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this idea that like challenging information about ourselves and about our relationships is bad.
Right.
It's not bad. Like it's just challenging information.
Yeah.
And that the experience that you describe with your partner about how the two of you were closer on the other side, it was because you understood each other and yourselves a little more deeply as a result of that.
And it like builds trust, I think, also.
Trust.
If like you have conflict and then you come back from it, like then you know that you can do that. And like we were talking about this earlier and it kind of made me think about like, oh, I don't know that like a relationship where you like that's like a bellwether or whatever in a relationship. Like a relationship where you haven't had conflict and then resolved it like on some level or another is like it kind of says like you're not invested yet, right? Like at least that's like, or like it's a marker, I think,
Of a lack of trust, I would say.
Yeah, or just a lack of like kind of progression.
Investment, yeah, progression.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I like to get in a fight on the first date. Just like show up like you're late. I hate this place. What are we going to do about this problem?
It's true. The person I'm dating, who I referenced before, and we've been dating for like 5 months, I guess. We definitely got to the point where you could feel it coming. It was like we talked about it. I'm like, I feel like we're gonna have a fight soon. And he'd be like, "Is it this?" And I'm like, "No, yep, it's that."
Here it is.
Here it is. Here's the fight. And I mean, I don't want to sound ridiculous, but I do think that is also such interesting material between two people. You know, I've said this a million times on this show. I say it a lot in my practice. Like, we are drawn to each other for all of the things that are like easy and good chemistry, but we're also drawn to each other for the things that are hard, you know, the light and the shadow. And the things that are hard is where, again, I'm a couples relationship therapist, so I am optimistic in this way. I think that we're drawn to each other for the opportunity to heal in some of those shadowy spaces.
Right.
And that's not like, oh, that's the bad part of the relationship. It's like, no, that's an essential part of the relationship. So say that too.
Yeah.
Additionally,
another smart ass thing. You got more than that? Holy shit.
I just want to tell people that you don't have to figure out the fight right away. You don't have to know right away why something is hard or why it's bothering you. You don't have to win the fight. You don't have to rush to a conclusion. It is okay to pause, as I was saying, and just be like, I don't know, this feels fucked up. I don't feel good about this and I don't like it. And I'm not really sure why. And it might take me a second to figure it out, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely a mistake I've made in the past in a few different ways. Like, because there's also a flip side of that that's like, oh, something's wrong. How do I fix it?
Right.
You know,
we don't have to rush to fix it.
We don't have to rush to fix it. It might not be your responsibility to fix it as the, you know, other person.
Speaking to Jessica's, like, the waterline theory of like these different systems that can be like activated in conflict, I've definitely had the experience of being upset in conflict and then taking a moment and being like, you know what, I don't actually think this is about something you did. I think this is about like a hard thing that I have inside of me. You know?
Yeah, well, and like the experience of being like I got pissed off at you about a hard thing inside of me, and we like navigated that together is fucking amazing. Right?
Yeah.
Or being on the
Yeah.
other side of that, like you experienced a hard thing inside of you, and you like showed it to me in a super vulnerable way that was maybe like, causing conflict.
Imperfect
It
and
was
challenging
imperfect. Just
and
like,
tense, yeah.
I'm gonna like love you so much more because you did
Yeah.
that. I'm not gonna,
Abandon you.
abandon you. Yeah.
Because you were supposed to be perfect.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That is some fucking white shit right there.
I was told you were perfect. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are like some just like, I think, little lessons I feel like I've learned along the way with conflict and moving from having conflict that felt like I was doing more damage to myself in my relationships to like trying to move towards conflict where I felt like I was getting closer to
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is interesting. I want to like in another episode this season talk about like when and how to break up, because I feel like we're talking about like the conflict that you have where you're staying in it, and then like sometimes people decide not to stay in it, and sometimes there are reasons for that, right? Or like sometimes that's a good decision, but every conflict is not a relationship ending one.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
And like every relationship that has conflict should not end, obviously. Like
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that I would like to say, kind of coming off of what you did, there is nothing I think that like gains my trust faster than someone being able to like be present to and hold some hard feelings with me, and not panic. You know?
Yeah. Even when it's like they might have some responsibility for them.
Yeah. And
I
perhaps
think that's
especially
what's
then.
even harder. I mean, there's like such a vast difference for me, the experience of somebody telling me like something hard that they're going through, that I feel like doesn't have anything that I'm not implicated in versus that I am implicated in at whatever level it is. Whether it's like something I actually did or it's like, my position socially or any of that stuff. Like that's always harder.
It's hard.
Yeah,
For sure.
And like holding that feeling and I guess having your own feeling in response, like that interplay is it's hard as fuck and it's all okay.
Yeah, it's all okay. It is. And that makes me want to kind of close out by asking you, Alex, what do you hope we would show our kids about fighting? When they're reflecting on their family of origin, how they learn to fight. What do you think we have shown them? What do you hope we'll show them?
Yeah. I would just say like sweep the leg if you need to go low, take them down. And then, just go for the throat
Don't be
right
afraid
away.
to fight dirty,
I'm
you
teaching
know?
them 5 pressure points that will neutralize, but like emotional ones. Shit that you can say that will devastate your emotional. No, I think, that it's okay it's interesting to see our kids be very anxious about us being in conflict.
Yeah.
Even with other partners that they haven't even met sometimes. Like the other day we were in the car and they're like, are you and Boa going to break up because you were talking about And I'm like, what? First of all...
Our poor oldest is always worried that I'm going to break up with people, which I think speaks to their anxious attachment.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going to break up
Sweetie.
with you, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. What was the question?
So you're teaching the kids the pressure points.
Yeah, that's right.
That it's okay to fight.
Yeah, that it's okay to fight and that conflict can be like contained and resolved. And like is a product of love. And like even when it gets big in a way that like might, be scary to like either witness or to like actually be a part of, that's not like ever going to be the end. You're never going to be like abandoned
Or banished.
because you did something wrong or because the other person was mad at you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that it's a way to learn about yourself
Mm-hmm.
and other people too.
Yeah. And like to get closer actually.
And it's just a part of loving people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the first episode.
Yes, the first of one. No, we've got a lot of good ideas for things that we're going to do this season on season 4 of Mistakes Were Made. We're going to talk about breaking up. We're going to talk about we didn't really talk about that sex party. We'll come back to that. So many good ideas. And we love you. Thank you for listening.
Please don't be mad at us.
Yeah, don't be. I hope everybody goes and go pick a fight. No. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on Instagram, and oh my God, it's so good meeting people out in the world who have listened to the podcast more. Both gratifying from an ego standpoint, but also just the feedback and participation and hearing the things that people got a lot out of. So definitely feel free to do that out in the world, but also digitally hit us up on Instagram or at mistakescast@gmail.com and let us know any feedback that you have, even if it's going to lead to some kind of conflict.
We love you enough to move through it together.
Exactly.
Yep. We want to engage.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
See you next time.